From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Coming up on Kansas Week, it's a new old rule that has animal lovers storming the State House, saying the Department of Agriculture is forcing the unnecessary deaths of sick dogs and cats. Plus, babies in prison? It could happen as the state considers a plan for a prison nursery in Topeka. But first, the flat tax debate, it's back and it's moving fast. Will it hit the same dead end as the last plan? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. Before we dive into this week's topics, I want to make a programming note. You'll notice that a major headline from this week is missing from our lineup, and that's the latest developments in the ongoing debate over bills affecting the transgender community. One in particular this week that would limit the medical care available to transgender youth in our state. It's not because we don't think it's a big deal. It's not because we don't think it's a big topic. We've discussed this topic in general and this bill specifically many times before on the show. I don't see any new information coming from further discussions. If you're interested in the various positions, you can certainly watch some of our previous episodes on YouTube. Meanwhile, at the same time, because we've been discussing this issue, there are a number of other important issues that impact our daily lives that have been overshadowed, which is why we're starting with the other biggest headline of the week, in my opinion at least, the return of the flat tax debate to the State House. And then, as I said in the headlines, it's moving fast. And just last week, we've gone from a new bill to committee hearing to Senate floor debate on Republican leadership's latest proposal. This time around, supporters say they've worked hard to address accusations that the flat tax idea helps out primarily the rich and leaves poor Kansans in the dust. But opponents say they've failed again. This latest proposal would cut the income tax to a single income tax rate for all, down to 5.7% this year, then dropping it bit by bit over the next few years until it reaches a final 5.45% in 2029. It also increases the standard deduction for single Kansans, making it equal to precisely half the standard deduction for married Kansans, then ties any future increases in the deduction to inflation. One CPA told lawmakers on Tuesday during the hearing he ran the numbers for a family of four and found a family with a $40,000 income benefited much more than a family with an $850,000 income.
So now they get a refund rather than owing money, owing taxes. So their improvement to their taxes is going from $16 owed to a $468 refund. So that's an improvement of $484.
By comparison, Novelli said, according to his numbers, the family with an $850,000 income only saw a $168 reduction in taxes. No one testified against this bill in the Senate Tax Committee hearing. However, the Kansas Reflector reports researchers at the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, that's a nonpartisan organization that favors a progressive tax system like we currently have, estimated the top 20% of Kansas earners would see nearly 40% of the benefits from this new proposal. That's folks making more than $315,000 a year. The Reflector says the ITAP researchers determined that under the proposal, a top 1% household with an average income of $1.9 million would see tax cuts of $3,861 after the plan's full phase-in. A Kansas household making less than $55,000 a year would see $237 in benefits. Billionaire Charles Koch would receive an estimated annual $485,000 in tax breaks under the proposal. And the big question on this was whether or not the Senate would be able to pass it with a supermajority that would be veto-proof. And late Thursday night, just before we recorded this episode, they did that. They had 29 votes. They need 27, if I've got my math right, to be veto-proof. So it is now moving on to the House for discussion. So what does all this mean? Let's dive in with this week's panelists. We have with us State Representative Christy Williams, a Republican from Augusta, Park City Republican State Representative Emil Bergquist, and Eric Litweiler with the Mental Health America South Central Kansas organization, of which I am a board member. Got to be transparent here. And former Democratic State Representative Tim Hodge from Newton. Thank you all so much for being here. Taxes, taxes, taxes. That has been the headline of this session. Does this make it all the way through? There were also some members outside of the Democratic Party in the House that had some concerns when the last bill came up. Do you think those concerns hold through this time?
I think we're going to see a tax cut. We have over $3 billion in reserves in Kansas. That's the people's money. It needs to go back to Kansans. The flat tax is a simplified way to provide income tax reductions year after year. It makes solid sense. And frankly, if you think about it, 20 states either have a flat tax or a no tax, and those states are the ones that are growing and have an inward migration. Let's do that for Kansas.
Emil?
We have great cooperation between the two chambers this year to work out a tax plan. We believed we had a good tax plan, and we believe we'll make another one. The work that the Senate's done can be worked through and processed in the House, and we'll come up with a good plan.
And yet we know, Tim, the governor pledged in her State of the State that she would veto any flat tax proposal. So we know, even if it passes both houses, it faces a veto, possibly a veto override. How does she work around that?
Well, I don't know if the governor has to work around anything. She's going to do what she needs to do, wants to do in this situation. I mean, we need a tax cut. But it's the age-old question is, who gets the tax cut? Is it going to be the folks at the top, or is it going to be the broader base, which is in the sales tax realm, in the property tax realm, in the lowering of utilities? I mean, is it going to be a tax cut for everybody or just a few people? And then they're going to say, oh, well, it'll trickle down. It never trickles down. It stays right where it gets cut.
I was going to say trickle-down economics was disproved back in the 80s under Reagan.
Well, yeah, we could go a long time on that. My point is, we can cut taxes. We can cut sales tax. Sales tax on food should have been cut 3 years ago. Property taxes should have been, the exemption should have been raised to $100,000 to $150,000 for the first amount of value. We have people being taxed out of their homes, and yet we're going to lower the top income bracket down. Meanwhile, we're holding hostage food sales tax and property tax. So the question is, who's going to get the tax cut? It should be everybody, not just a few.
Property tax is in this plan, and it goes to $100,000. And also Social Security tax will be eliminated, and food sales tax was in our plan. So actually, it would be disingenuous to say that this tax plan only helps the wealthy. Actually, if you look at the hardcore numbers, it's helping the middle class and the lower income with a greater percentage.
Amen to all of that, except holding those good things hostage so that you can get the tax cut for the rich people. Do them item by item, separate them out, vote on them item by item. Don't add in the poison pill of the tax cut for the rich and then say, well, we tried. And that's disingenuous, in my opinion. Do it one by one. I challenge the legislature to do this. You could do this.
They would be successful one by one because it isn't a poison pill.
They wouldn't
a flat
be
tax has been
successful on the
proven
tax cut
to
for
be
the rich.
successful in 8 other states, and we need to be there. And they're both red and blue states that have done it. And it helps that consensus revenue expectations and reporting in the future if you have one versus trying to figure out how much to deduct in each level. We have 3. It's complicated.
That's not
well,
hard to do.
If you haven't been watching the debates on YouTube, live stream from the State House, you just got it encapsulated right here. This is what the debates on the floor
Let's go further.
in the committees have been like. So now you have an idea of the issues involved, but there are a lot of other issues going on in Topeka as well. One of them much more serious. Nearly a dozen children died while in the Kansas foster care system in 2023 alone. That's out of some 10,000 kids in the foster care system. KSN's Zena Taher shares why some foster parents say this doesn't come as a shock to them.
In 4 years, former foster parent Derek Davenport and his husband took in more than 40 kids and adopted 5.
Most foster kids, from our experience, all have some sort of mental health issue because of their trauma.
Accessing mental health help is a challenge, a reality Monique Lovelady is familiar with through her work at a placement agency for foster children.
I just feel like the agencies have to fight a little harder to push the government and the state to cover and help with medical care that these kids need, and mental health care.
Lovelady also has personal perspective as a foster parent herself.
They'll just do the basics, send them to therapy, put them on some pills, but sometimes it's so much more than that they need.
Finding support for those needs comes with a weight, an issue acknowledged by advocates and foster parents.
There are way too many wait lists for way too many important services in this state right now.
If you get a child that needs extensive psychiatric care, that can be challenging. The wait list is long. We were put on wait lists sometimes for months.
Parents and advocates push access to health services could mean the difference between life and death.
All right, so we've got a lot going on there, and child deaths are extremely important and a huge deal. As we look at this issue, according to the Child Death Review Board, I want to get these numbers right, on average, 1 out of every 3 kids who dies in Kansas has some sort of history with the foster care system. I mean, that's a big deal. Sometimes they're in foster care when they die, but not always. Sometimes it's afterward. There's some long-term mental health issues that often go along with that.
Absolutely. When you look at the causes of death for these 11 kids, for instance, 2 of them were suicide and 1 was a drug issue. That right there is one of the most, two of the most common mental health concerns that we're talking about within the Wichita community. I would much rather, consider the issue of prevention versus treatment. It's fine to say this child has been abused, has trauma, has drug issues, whatever it is. Let's fix it now. That money needs to be shifted into prevention. Why don't we stop those issues from occurring in the first place rather than wait for them to manifest and then try to retroactively treat them? It's less efficient, it's less cost effective, it's less successful when we could just prevent them in the first place, but it seems like society needs to see the issue before they're willing to put money towards it. Without understanding that we could keep the issue from manifesting in the first place if we would just fund prevention efforts.
And we have seen some issues being raised in the legislature this last year, especially the new psychiatric hospital plan for South Central Kansas. That's been a big deal, but that's really been more about adults and less about kids.
We've spent millions more in social service budget. I don't know what else we can do to target and care for kids. It's a tragic story. It's tragic numbers. And the foster care system continues to be a headline in this administration and prior to this administration. I think the legislature needs to do some serious soul searching to figure out how we can better support our foster care system, and I don't have those answers.
Well, if you'd like some answers, I'm happy to help. The really short answer is Medicaid expansion. It's been needed for years.
Actually, that's not the answer, and if we want to deep dive into Medicaid expansion, we certainly can, but that's not going, children are already cared for without the expansion. Medicaid expansion is actually for able-bodied adults. We already care for the children and elderly, as well as the disabled without expansion. In fact, we put $330 million in those type of enhancements just since 2019.
That may
Kansas
be, but you have to understand that when adults, when you're phrasing able-bodied adults are sick, their families are sick, their children are sick. These are generational cycles, and when you're not fixing the adults, you're leaving the children to languish as well.
So again, we're talking about foster care. All children, where if they can, because of income, can qualify, they have all the medical treatment that they could possibly need. As well, in schools, we have mental health pilot programs available to students. We have counseling service available to students. So I will just respectfully disagree. That is not the issue, and you cannot heal brokenness with every state program in the world. It still will not fix every problem that society has.
But it will help. Children and disabled adults and elderly are on waiting list now, and when Medicaid expansion would only interrupt that waiting list longer. We need the ones that are in greatest need, that are already on the IDD list and others, to be able to be met, their needs to be met first, or we'll never get to them. They'll be pushed into the background.
Well, you touched on an interesting point, because you're absolutely right about the lack of clinicians. And I guess my question is, what's being done to address that issue? Nonprofits like MHA would hire 30 more people today if we could find them. But what's the legislature doing to try to broaden the clinical access so we have the practitioners to address these issues?
We'll invite you into appropriations where we can look at our budget and see how much we put into social service. It has been a huge increase. As I mentioned, just in the Medicaid sector of social service alone, we've increased $313 million since 2019. So there is a lot being done, but it will not fix every broken situation that we have in our communities.
It won't fix all of them, but it will fix some of them.
I think a lot of trouble stems from the 2012 through 2017 years when the cuts were made to foster care so deeply. And then, yes, we are funding and making these giant increases, but a lot of that's just to get us to where we were and then to deal with inflation at this point. When you've decimated a foster care workforce in a point where people don't think the job is stable to stay in it for a career, when you've lost all that institutional knowledge, it's going to take more than a few years to build it back up. I guess I'm proud to say that, that when the tax code was fixed in 2017 and you were able to fund foster care, and when you were able to actually put these contracts out to companies and groups that would take care of kids and not have them staying in the offices or not having impossible caseloads. I mean, that's happening. We are getting improvements. And I think, I think it is a good thing to talk about Medicaid expansion as a partner situation that would help it out. But
back to the issue at hand, though, the children are the ones we're concerned about in this particular topic, and we need to care for each one of those lives specifically rather than only long range. So.
All right. And we're going to let that be the last word because we do have other things to talk about. Sticking with kids, sending babies to prison. That's the latest idea Kansas lawmakers are talking about. No, not because an infant has committed a crime, but because their mother has. The goal is to help women who have babies while behind bars form better bonds and become better parents, giving them a reason not to commit new crimes once released.
Oh, what's that?
This may look more like a daycare than a prison, but the moms who live here with their babies and toddlers are all serving time at the Washington Correction Center for Women. It's a program state lawmakers in Kansas are considering recreating right here.
What's this? Bracelet.
House Bill 2811 would create a prison nursery program at the Topeka Correctional Facility, the only women's prison in Kansas. As proposed, women who have babies while in prison would be able to keep their babies with them for up to 3 years after birth. Right now, they get 24 to 48 hours in the hospital to bond, but then the baby either goes to stay with family or friends or enters foster care.
The women who I've worked with over the past 10 years who have had their babies and come back without them are not the same because of that sudden, sharp disconnect from that person that they've been growing for 9 months.
Amy Pinger volunteers at the Topeka prison through the United Women in Faith program. She told state lawmakers Wednesday she's seen moms go years after leaving the hospital without being able to even touch their baby, especially in this age of video visits.
There's lots of ways that these women can parent their older children through the use of this technology, but those babies, creating that bond with that child as they're born and all the power that can come from that, both for the baby and for the mom.
She and other volunteers testified about how much of a difference being able to bond with that child can make. In Washington state, they said women who participated in the program reoffended only 15% of the time, while women in general population reoffended 38% of the time. And that saves money, from fewer people in prison to fewer kids in foster care. But some folks told lawmakers the estimated cost of $3.7 million to make a prison nursery in Kansas a reality, that could be better spent elsewhere.
What would be a better solution would be taking this considerable amount of funding and pouring it into a community-based solution whereby moms can stay in the community with their baby and with their older children, as well as with their network of support.
All right, and Chrissy, you were on that committee at that hearing. What is the reception to this bill so far?
So I'm actually a supporter of this $3.7 million to help mothers bond with their children for a longer period of time, allow those mothers to have hope for the future. That hope can translate into some actual responsibility and purpose that can change their lives and change the life of their child. So I think this is a very good opportunity for our state. There may be some things that we could change in the bill to make it better, but right now I think it's a good idea.
Corrections means bringing resolve to somebody, and we concentrate on penalty and we concentrate on incarceration. And when we try to get people back into the workforce, we work on work programs within the prison system. We need, the greatest is to have a family restored and to have the family unit restored so that it can launch out into the community and have another generation of better stuff.
Yeah, we need to make sure that the foster care system and that the child needed care court system don't pick up this big hole that we're making by having kids without parents. And so, and a lot of these crimes are my opinion, is just being poor, petty theft, you know, driving without a license, driving while suspended, those types of things where you spend 3, 4, 5 months in jail, and meanwhile your child's growing up. So this is a no-brainer kind of a program that should be a good thing, and I encourage you guys to vote for it.
A little bit of lobbying going on here, folks. That's how it works.
Yeah, building the bond, obviously, that's a huge issue for mental health, and so the more we can allow mothers and daughters to bond, regardless of where it may be, is a wonderful thing. You know, the kids didn't do anything wrong just because the mothers may have. And, you know, I get the argument about the being able to use that money elsewhere, and I suppose it could be, but my thing is, again, not to sound like a broken record, but preventing crime, preventing mental illness, preventing food deserts, preventing unemployment. Yes, all of those things could have probably kept those women out of prison for the most part in the first place. But for now, we have an immediate solution, and I think that's a small price to pay for better mental health in the community.
All right. Well, our last story for today, 2 animal advocacy groups are trying to change a Kansas law to save sick animals. First established more than 100 years ago to prevent disease from spreading among livestock, they say the state is now using it to prohibit shelters from sending sick animals to foster care so they can get better. Kate's Nick Nelson takes a look at what the shelters want changed.
In the past, they could have looked for a rescue partner to take those into care, you know, to get them veterinary care and isolation and all of those things until they were safe to be adopted out. But because of the way that this new standing order is being applied, that's no longer an option. And if a shelter does not have the financial or isolation capabilities to care for those animals until they're well again, euthanasia is really the only option.
The Wichita Animal Action League is partnering with the Kansas Humane Society to find a way to save more sick animals. Heather Lansdowne with the Kansas Department of Agriculture says they revised the original law in 2019 because of a spike in kennel cough.
The order in 2019 allowed dogs to be shared to foster homes, provided they had a written statement in place that provided the veterinary care plan.
The KDA had a meeting with animal shelters last week after the shelters raised concerns to see if another change could be made to the law. Wall says this is a matter of life and death for the animals. Both organizations say help is needed from the public.
This doesn't just affect us. It doesn't just affect Wall or WAS. This affects everything in Kansas, every rescue, every shelter. So again, we need those avenues open so that we can save those lives.
And certainly it's something we've been hearing nonstop in the newsroom ever since this saga first started, about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. I'm wondering in Newton if the Humane Society there is being as vocal about it.
I'm sure they are, because they are a very good group of folks that want and have done a really good job having a no-kill policy, despite the animals a disease that may be infested. But and they do a really good job of keeping the animals quarantined when there is a problem. And yeah, it's definitely an issue. I'm not as well versed as I should be, obviously, but I think it's definitely a cause that needs to be looked at.
And I know that folks are being encouraged to reach out to their state lawmakers. Are you two hearing from constituents about this yet?
Sure am.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, several emails. And actually, this is an example with regulatory authority of our agencies maybe are overstepping and in areas where the legislature does need to step in. I would love to ensure that foster care families for these dogs that need some love and healing were available. So I hope that we can do something.
And frankly, it's hard enough to get people to express their concerns when they are concerned. You know, we don't get enough, so we need to hear from them.
Yeah. Well, and there's something about animals, because every time an issue comes up, our emails go nuts when it comes to the animals.
We all love our animals.
Yeah.
Listen, I have hogs and cattle, but I also have a dog, and I love that little guy. I never thought I would, and then 2 weeks later, we're taking selfies on the couch with matching pajamas. So I totally understand the love of the dog. You know, my concern is, honestly, this is one of those things, the law was put in place for a very good and valid reason. And the fact is, unfortunately, that reason still exists. If you've got 20 dogs all living together and one of them is sick, pretty soon 20 of them are going to be sick. So reversing course on this is probably a good thing up until the moment that it's not all of a sudden. So I think the incremental change that has been happening so far is probably good. I think we're being cautious and incrementally changing how this law is applied, and we'll see where it goes.
Well, what I would say is the shelters are saying that this isn't an incremental change. It's been a 180-degree sea change, and they're very concerned about it. One of their biggest concerns is, as they're pushing for a legislative changes, is there going to be enough time for something like that to happen this year?
And that's the hard thing. We don't have a lot of time. We're just becoming aware of the problem, but you know, treatments are available for these animals. If there's a solution already there, then I'd like to help them finalize the solution from a legal standpoint. However, the Department of Ag can go ahead and reverse their position right now without our legislation and just put a hold on it and ensure that there are safety precautions in place so that the animals can get their treatment. And I have to believe that there is a better way than just this hard stop that has occurred in the last few weeks.
So, I mean, has there been any discussion, do you know, of maybe a bill coming up, anything like that? Because you said you're just starting to hear from constituents?
Just starting to hear.
Yeah.
I've not heard, but now I'm going to ask and I'm going to look into it.
Okay. Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. It is certainly something I know a lot of our viewers care about quite a bit, which is why we discussed it. Thank you all so much for being with us. We are out of time. We'd also like to thank our news partners, the Wichita Eagle, Cake News, and KSN News, for sharing their materials with us. We hope you found our discussion helpful. What else do you think we should be talking about? We'd love to hear your ideas. Just drop us a line at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, stay safe and have a great week.